global mode, we can give IP version 6 space router space OSPF. So the syntax for configuring OSPF version 3 routing protocol is IP version 6 space router space OSPF. Then we have to give process ID. Process ID is 1 to 65,535. So in that range we can give. Here I will give 1. Enter. Okay. In OSPF version 3 we have to apply router ID. So here we can give the router ID, router hyphen ID. So the router ID is an 32-bit address. It is an IP version 4 address. So in router 0, I will assign the router ID as 1.1.1.1 exit. Okay. So in router 0, first of all we have to configure OSPF version 3 routing protocol. So the syntax for configuring OSPF version 3 routing protocol is, in global mode we have to give IP version 6 space router space OSPF space, next we can give process ID. Process ID we can give 1 to 65,535. So in that range we have to give. Here I will give 1. Okay. Next we have to give router ID. So for what purpose we have to give router ID means, in router 0, so in network 1, network 2, network 3 and network 4, so we have to identify router 0 means through the network through the router ID only we have to identify that router. In OSPF by default it can be taken as, in router 0 we have 3 physical interface and 1 loopback interface. So if the OSPF version 3 routing protocol is running, so the router ID can be taken as the first preference can be given to loopback interface. So the loopback interface IP address can be taken as an router ID of router 0. So router 0. So if it is not assigning any loopback interface means, so in that physical interface which IP address is largest means that IP address can be taken as an router ID. So otherwise we have to assign manually. So in OSPF the router ID is used to identify that particular router. So router ID whether we have to manually assign or by default it can be taken. If it is default it can be taken means, if the router have 3 physical interface and 1 loopback interface means the first preference given to the loopback interface. The loopback interface IP address can be taken as an router ID. If it is not assigning any loopback interface means, in that physical interface which IP address is largest means that IP address can be taken as an router ID. Okay, here I will give manually assign router ID 1.1.1.1. So in IP version 6 we have to assign router ID. So router ID is an 32-bit address. It is an IP version 4. So in router 0 I will assign the router ID as 1.1.1.1. Okay. Next, in IP version 4 we have to configure OSPF means the direct connected network direct connected network net ID and wildcard mask we have to given, and next we have to mention area. Here we can go to that particular interface and enable the OSPF version 3 routing protocol. We can go to the interface fast ethernet 0/0 interface fast ethernet 0/0. Here we can give IP version 6 OSPF. So the IP version 6 space OSPF, so the process ID is 1. Next we have to mention the area. It is an area 0. Enter. Exit. Next, direct connected interface of router 0 is interface serial 0/0. So we have to go to that particular interface serial 0/0/0. Here we can give IP version 6 space OSPF. Then we have to mention the process ID 1. Next we have to mention area. It is an area 0. Exit. Next, direct connected interface is interface serial 0/0/1. So here we have to give interface serial 0/0/1. So IP version 6 space OSPF space process ID is 1. Next we have to give area 0. Exit. Okay. So now we have configured IP OSPF version 3 routing protocol on router 0. Now we can configure OSPF version 3 routing protocol into router 2. So go to the global mode. In global mode we have to give IP version 6 space router space OSPF. Then we have to give process ID. So the process ID is an unique. So here we give, so the process ID range is 1 to 65,535. So in router 0 we have assigned the process ID as 1. So here I will assign the process ID as 2. Next we have to assign the router ID. So router hyphen ID. So router ID is an 32-bit address. It is an IP version 4. So here I will assign the router ID as 2.2.2.2. Exit. Next, the direct connected interface of router 2 is interface fast Ethernet 0/0. So we have to go to that particular interface fast Ethernet 0/0. So IP version 6 space OSPF. Next, process ID is 2. Next we have to give area 0. Exit. Next, direct connected interface is interface serial 0/0/1. Here we can give interface space serial 0/0/1.